Greetings, dear friends. Operational situation at the front on the 13th of February. Also at the end, we will talk about a very interesting news background about the production of ammunition on the territory of the U, as well as possible assistance from the United States. Well, we will start with you from the Skopinsko-Limansky section of the front. In the area of Sinkovka, no changes were recorded, all attacks were repulsed. Now we see an increase, pressure from the enemy as a whole, in the area of Sinkovka, on the Kopinsky direction, that is, not only to the north, but also through the forest. Attempts are being made to advance from the first estuary in a southwesterly direction. We have talked with you that an attempt will most likely be made by Russian troops to align along the road, that is, to occupy part of the forest area and then attack in an easterly direction, that is, the western outskirts of Sinkovka. And to date, active hostilities have been reported in the area of the Gray Zone. Just the same, an attempt to advance along the railway in the southern direction by the Russian troops is now being observed. Therefore, active hostilities continue. But according to the information that was available, it was possible to repel all attacks, that is, without any changes. The high rate of fighting remains in the Lyman direction, but we do not record any changes, as well as in the Bologorovka area of the Luhansk region. In the Bakhmut direction, the enemy changed the attack vector. We have said that it is unlikely that this will be the Yar hours, although attempts have been made along the railway. To align, I would say more, the front line with Bogdanovka. So there have been attempts to advance, and they continue. That is, to reach the railway platform Veryanovka, but at the same time, the enemy attacked from the Popovsky forest. In a southerly direction, that is, another landing was small, and there was an attack from the Kromov area to the dairy farm, and then again on one of the landings of the northern river. According to the situation today, the enemy has advanced on a front section, up to 155 kilometers wide, to a depth of 750 meters. It looks like this. So what does it give him? As I predicted, the likely blow will certainly be Ivanovskaya, and he will change the vector of his attacks, and so it happened. He wants to get close to this settlement from the north, so that he can then attack from at least two directions. So, the first point is that from the Popovsky forest, in the south direction, that is, there are several landings, which they are aimed at today, and they are being attacked. This is the first moment. The second point is that one of the small landings was also occupied from Kromov. And then look, if there is a river, and Stavka, where Kromova is, in the Kromov area, then just north of Ivanovsko. The river itself ends with us, and there are already dirt roads to Ivanovsko. That is, just the same, there is no natural border that we have, well, conditionally in the Kromov area. Between Kromov was Ivanovsky, that is, in the form of a rate and a river. Approaching directly to himself, the enemy also approaches the fact that he may try to storm the settlement, but I will say more about this later. So the second point is that there is also pressure on Ivanovskaya itself, which we have been talking about lately, and the settlement itself is actually today, as you can see from one of the drone shots, it has been destroyed, and the enemy continues its regular shelling. In other words, we actually see Marinka here. Let's speak directly. That is, these are, so to speak, white spots. This is all that was left of the buildings. Some buildings are in better condition, which still allows for fighting, close-range shooting battles, urban type of combat. But some buildings are simply destroyed to zero, as in Marinka. And accordingly, with the number of artillery strikes, the enemy has the opportunity to carry out assault actions and advance. But if he has something to cling to, gain a foothold there, because there was already one attempt to enter Ivanovsko. Then he managed to knock out Russian troops, but there is a possibility, of course, that he will storm again, based on its vector. And so in the north today, the situation is different. And as you have seen, the situation in the area of the abandoned airfield has been corrected. A little more red zone has been added. This is more clarification there on one of the fences where Russian troops are entrenched, and the pressure goes both along the forest belt, along the road T0504, and attempts to move along approximately this area of the gray zone. What does this mean? About the fact that the enemy will take at least two directions of the assault actions of Ivanovsky, as much as possible dispersing the forces of the armed forces in the settlement itself in this way. And of course, it will try to conduct a number of distracting strikes in neighboring areas. Most likely it will be observed activity between Kleshivka and an abandoned airfield. North of the ticks in the cinema, and at the cascade of stakes most likely. Therefore, today this is the situation we have. That is, in fact, the main target in the Bakhmut direction becomes Ivanovskaya for the enemy. Despite the fact that they had tactical successes before, even in November-December that year in Bogdanovka and on its outskirts. This is not the main goal. We turn to the Avdeevka direction. Active fighting continues in the northern part of Avdeevka, and in the south. We'll start with the northern part. As for the Garden Association of Western Dachas, active hostilities continue. They are continuing not only in the western direction, there are also attempts to move in the northern direction, that is, as much as possible to the territory of Avdeevsky, as from a chemical plant, to enter here, just the same. We have a fence passing through, and the enemy also approached it. Managed to discard. Well, the activity from the Yagodka Garden Association, that is, there were attacks, they managed to repel. Retreated to their original positions in the landing, that is, the Pector also changes periodically, here where it will be possible to catch on, gain a foothold. There the enemy is trying to develop a further offensive. So far, it is possible to restrain, if we say the direction of Avdeevsky as Sohim. At the same time, the main goal is still cutting the supply, that is, cutting Avdeevka in two, due to the fact that they will take control of part of the industrial avenue. Therefore, very heavy fighting continues in the area of Agricultural Machinery Street and Timiryozov Street, an attempt to bypass the same carpool, and there are very heavy battles going on in the carpool area now, well, and get as close as possible to, I repeat, to Industrial Avenue. Therefore, there is very heavy fighting here. At the same time, there are further reports that Russian troops have pulled up equipment. We have already said that they are pulling up tanks and armored vehicles. The village of Veselo is there, it is to the north. Let me show you roughly from where. So from this area by the Garden Association, well, and the transfer to the northern part of Avdeevka. And accordingly, due to this, they are already conducting more serious assault operations, with the support of armored vehicles including tanks. Therefore, the main task is, as we talked about on last night's broadcast, to transfer as much strength as possible. And that's the fist that they will try to use in approximately this area. Therefore, heavy shooting battles are continuing now, but we are not recording any changes. Everything remains within the gray zone. There are moments where the situation is dynamic, because according to reports from the field, yesterday we added with you, as you remember, a small clarification in this area. One of the buildings in the red zone is near the railway lane, and there are a number of reports that there was also an attempt to move directly to the bridge along Heroes Street. One of the buildings had active hostilities. It was possible to push back the Russian troops as a result to Zheleznodorozhny Lane, but, as we see, there is pressure on this sector of the front as well. Well, here, roughly speaking, there is an attempt, let's say, to bypass a number of positions where Russian troops have now been stopped. They are trying to bypass them at the bridge, but without any changes. Well, active hostilities continue along the alley of the 50th anniversary of Avdeevsky, as Sohim, as well as in the direction of Donetsk Beach. There is also Independence Street, there is also Podtravneva Street, where the enemy's activity is also quite high. But this is more, I would say, already the eastern section than the west of the attack. Just the same, they are trying to break through to Donetsk Beach and gain a foothold in a number of positions. The situation remains dynamic and very, very difficult, to put it mildly. As for the south of Avdeevka, the southern flank, south and southwest of Avdeevka, active fighting continues at the Garden Association with varying success. Also yesterday, footage was published of the destruction of 2 units of Russian armored vehicles at the Royal Hunt. They are also trying to tighten it up in this area, to attack with larger forces, but they managed to repel most of the attacks now. Nevertheless, the enemy does not reduce the pressure, but manages to restrain. This is the most important thing today. Although again, in order not to be encouraging, not to draw a super good picture, I will say this, what I said yesterday. The enemy is now accumulating the main forces in Avdeevka, and is taking the main blow. So naturally it is still impossible to relax in any case. Well, there is also pressure from the Opitny district, conditionally, on the Vineyards to Garden Association. An attempt to advance and bypass the positions of the Zenit fortified area, so very heavy fighting continues in this zone. Moving on. Georgievka. Are there any new promotions? Asked the question. And in general, the Kurikov direction, what is happening now? Because there are a number of reports that, accordingly, the enemy is increasing further pressure, pulling up forces, in order to storm the victory in the Kurikovsky direction. Well, let's learn more. So according to Georgievka, we do not record any changes, not in the easternmost part of the settlement, not along the forest belts. If there are attacks, yes, they have a positional character, and are more distracting due to the fact that now the main blow is shifting to victory. If before large forces attacked, as you remember, Georgievka, and along the forest belts, there were attempts to advance, then the Russian troops retreated from the northern pigsty to the fur yard, and the main pressure began to win. What is the reason for this? First of all, because in order to storm further to the Stavka, it is necessary to use larger forces than those that attacked one of the supports near the forest belt. So this is one time. Naturally, it was easier for them to use these large forces where they can achieve greater success, namely victory, that is, a locality. Therefore, the main combat-ready forces were transferred to this section of the front. Therefore, active hostilities continue here. The enemy is making a lot of attempts now, not only to advance to victory itself, but also to the neighboring abandoned field reservoirs, as we have talked about before. So, there are two of them here. They are under the control of the APU, and, accordingly, attacks are going in these directions, as well as in the direction of victory. As for the South Donetsk sector of the Novomykhailovka front, no new information has been received, except that there are active hostilities with varying success in the eastern part, on the eastern outskirts of the settlement. According to reports from the field, the situation remains very difficult, but unfortunately, no more comments have been sent. Maybe fortunately, because stabilization measures are being carried out now. Along the Velikonovoselkovsky-Rekovsky section of the front without any changes, and towards the markets. The bridgehead on the left bank of the Dnieper was updated today. The soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine published footage where they installed a flag on one of the water towers on the outskirts of the village of Krinky, and accordingly a gray zone has been added to date. The situation for yesterday, the situation for today. We have a water tower in this area, and accordingly, there were naturally no Russian troops in the neighboring building, since the APU openly operated in this area. But the situation remains, as you know, under clarification, because it is quite dynamic, based on what we have seen recently. In other words, it moves regularly, because the enemy is attacking, and trying to stabilize the situation in this sector of the front. And this flag, which was hoisted by the soldiers of the AFU of the 35th Brigade, will actually play its role, because a lot of people from the field, if we talk about the Russian side, reported to the top, that the situation there is more or less already stabilized. As we know, there have been a lot of statements that the APU is getting worse and worse, they will soon leave the bridgehead, and the bridgehead has expanded in recent days, on the contrary, and actually the establishment of a flag. First of all, it was installed both in the eastern part, and now in the western part. On the western outskirts, as we see, there is a market, so this shows the control zone conditionally, yes today, where the APU is located, that is, the bridgehead has expanded on the contrary. There is such a moment, but it's too early to talk about anything yet, as I said, for a bridgehead, because there is still a lot of work to be done, against the background of the fact that we have active hostilities in Avdeevka. Of course it is necessary to stabilize several sections of the front, including the same Georgievka, including Novomikhailovka, before we talk about serious offensive actions on the bridgehead. This is the situation we have at the front today.